23rd of September, 2025. Hope you're having a good day, good evening, good night, good morning, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Coming to you live from the sun-setting Middle East here in Israel at the end of the first day of the Rosh Hashanah holiday. So, Chag Sameach, Shana Tova to all my fellow members of the tribe. And this is a little video about the situation in the Middle East since we've seen declarations now from France, the United Kingdom, Australia, Portugal, Canada, and a number of other countries, like Finland, right, or Norway, yeah, Luxembourg, and I forget whoever else made their grand declarations yesterday at the UN in New York. What complete political theater that was. Complete joke. And also, by the way, when the Palestinian Authority accepted those statements of recognition of the state of Palestine, they technically violated the Declaration of Principles that were signed, that were initiated in Oslo, Norway, and were signed at the White House in Washington, D.C. back in 1993, in September, actually. And what that means is that now 32 years after the signing of the Declaration of Principles, even though the document itself has been violated many times, mainly by the Palestinians who, under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, didn't even let the ink dry on the document before he basically ordered a bunch of attacks by Palestinian terrorists against Israelis, even though he was standing up there in his stupid uniform, looking ridiculous, with his ethnically appropriated, culturally appropriated keffiyeh on his head, his Iraqi keffiyeh that he pretended was a Palestinian symbol. And even as he's saying, "No more blood," on his little silly quote that he said with Rabin and Clinton. And he didn't even let the ink dry before he literally told his PLO terrorists and other crazy people in his organization to start attacking Israel, and they did. And there were suicide bombs and other terrorist attacks, bus bombings of knife attacks, gunshot attacks, all kinds of different terrorist attacks across Israel. And so that was already the kickstart of the violations. Another violation. And people will say, yeah, but Jerusalem and settlements, the legal status of Jerusalem under Israeli law and status of settlements and all that, they're building new settlements, was the violation by Israel. Technically, it wasn't, because the Declaration of Principles did not forbid building settlements in areas that Israel controls. And illegal settlements, if you want to call them that, settlements built outside of Israel's control, that doesn't happen. Because people who are building settlements in areas that the Palestinian control, that's not going to happen. They don't allow settlements to be built there. Forget settlements. They don't allow Jews to be there, period. So that's a real apartheid. That's really Yudin Ryan, actually, meaning ethnically there are no Jews living under Palestinian control because the Palestinians do not allow it. So when people say apartheid, and Israel is apartheid, no, there's no apartheid in Israel, but there is 100% Yudin Ryan under Palestinian control, which is worse than apartheid, because any Jew who enters their territory is in danger for their life. Okay. If a Palestinian enters Israel, they're not immediately in danger for their life. There are plenty of Palestinians, by the way, who, to this day, plenty. Yes, it's a smaller number now than before October 7th, but to this day, there are a number who enter Israel every day for work. And you have to remember the people who live, for example, in Jerusalem, who have the right to travel back and forth pretty freely between Judea and Samaria, like Ramallah or wherever they want to go, and Jerusalem. There's plenty of people doing that every day. They're not in immediate danger when they enter Israel. But if a Jew is to get on a bus and go to their town in Ramallah or wherever, Hebron, Jenin, anywhere, the Jew's life is in immediate danger because they're the ones who are actually ethno supremacists, the Palestinians, that is. Anyway, so top of that, in 2012, the Palestinians also violated the Declaration of Principles, technically, according to the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, or the letter of the document and the spirit of the document, the framework of the Declaration of Principles. They violated it when they sought ascension as a state, to be recognized as a state, with special statehood status granted to them at the UN. So they violated the Declaration of Principles again for the manyth time. And that's not a word, but let's just for however many times they violated it by then, when they literally went beyond the framework of the Declaration of Principles to seek membership as a state, as an observer state in the United Nations, and they were granted that, even though they're not a state, right? So, because you remember, the entire point of the DOP is that the two parties, the two signatory parties, namely Israel and the PLO, which then created the PA after it, would be the only two members, the only two parties required to have direct negotiations about the final status of all of the issues, all the outstanding issues, including statehood, Jerusalem, borders, land swaps, resettlement of people in one place or another, whatever it might be. All of the different issues were meant to be settled through negotiation. And the one side that always said no was the Palestinians, specifically under Arafat, and then under Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas, whatever you want to call him. And they have never accepted a peace deal. And you can give me all the excuses in the world, and you can tell me all the Palestinian propaganda you want. Well, Rabin was killed by a right winger. Sadat was killed by jihadis also. Right? King Hussein's father, not the current King of Jordan, but the grandfather of the current King of Jordan, was also killed when he came to Jerusalem. Right? He was assassinated, and then his son took over, King Hussein, and he wrote a book, Uneasy Lies the Head, which is about how difficult it was for him to manage being a king of Jordan, which, by the way, is Palestine. It's literally a country with 70 or 80% of the population that identifies that, and he represents a tiny percentage of the people there. And Abdullah, his son, now the king, represents a tiny percentage. But in any case, so yes, the Palestinians violated the Declaration of Principles yet again in 2012. And now, in 2025, yet again, when the Palestinians accepted the statements of recognition of the state of Palestine, that was a unilateral action by the Palestinians, okay? The countries that said their declarations, whatever, they're entitled to do whatever they want. They're third parties. They can say whatever they want. It has no bearing on the Declaration of Principles. But what does have a bearing is that the Palestinians prejudiced the framework of the Declaration of Principles, and they biased the framework of the Declaration of Principles by accepting fake recognition, basically. Theatrical recognition, okay? It's theatrical in the sense that those declarations don't change the facts on the ground. There is no state called Palestine. There is no country called that, right? You can't fly there. You can't get a visa when you go there, right, to go to Palestine. You don't require a visa. You need to go through a checkpoint. Yes, you need to go through a checkpoint when you cross any border. Okay, Palestine, or whatever they want to call it, the land that they want to be Palestine is not considered part of Israel at the moment under existing agreements, right? That's normal. You cross from Mexico to the United States, there's also a checkpoint right at the border. You cross from France to Germany, same thing. Or France to Belgium, or England to You go from England to any other place. Go to you know any country in Europe or any country that have land borders. When you cross the land border, there's a border. You got to go through it, right? When you go through an airport, you got to go through border control. Those are checkpoints too. They're just a little different, but they're still checkpoints. And if you get crazy standing in line at an airport, bad things can happen to you. Right? They have security in airports, just like they do at military points, checkpoints across Israel. Anyway, by taking this unilateral action and accepting these declarations that recognize a so-called state of Palestine, the Palestinian Authority basically took single-handed unilateral action, effectively putting the final nail in the coffin of the Oslo Accords, of the Declaration of Principles. And thus, what they gave is they gave Israel the opportunity, should it so choose, to basically say that agreement has been violated now so many times, and we've held our patient ways, we've given them chance after chance after chance, and they've simply failed for now more than 3 decades to actually move the ball forward towards the purpose. Hello there, I see you. So, should Netanyahu choose to, or frankly any further government of Israel choose to, Israel has every legal right to dismiss the DOP, dissolve the Palestinian Authority, and take control of Judea and Samaria completely and declare sovereignty over the land. Now, the question is, would they do that? Should they do that? That is a whole different topic. It's a very different topic. A lot of pros and cons you could argue for that. Some people say, yes, absolutely, Israel should do that. Some people will point out to the fact that if we do that, then we have a massive demographic shift issue to deal with, or we have to grant a separate type of citizenship to people who are there, but that Israel does not want to consider Israeli. So we would need to give them basically their own citizenship without giving them a state that has land. Is that possible? Absolutely, it's possible. There can be people living in a land that they've lived in for a long time and they don't control that land, but they still have the right to be there and travel in and out and whatever, and they still have to abide by the laws of that land, and they're not citizens of that land. They're citizens of a fictitious government or a real government, you could call it, but that real government doesn't control any land. No problem. They can control their buildings, they can make their laws, apply them to their own people. They could not apply them to Israeli people living in those areas, but they could apply them to their own people. No problem. They don't need to have land to have a state or to have a sovereign decision-making body for themselves. And they would still have to live under Israeli security rules, whether they like it or not. Now, you might say to yourself, but Yashi, you sound like such an extremist when you're saying this. To which my answer is, if you think I'm being extremist, actually, I'm happy because I'm not. What I want is peace. What the Palestinians have avoided for decades is peace. That, as a whole, as a leadership of their people, and unfortunately, largely the populace itself. They have avoided making peace with Israel. They've done everything they could until now to maintain basically a violent struggle against Jewish people and Israelis as a whole. And their national aspiration, if you want to call it that, remains to this very day the destruction of the state of Israel. They have no constructive national aspiration. They don't seek to build anything positive. Now, I know there's some people who do. I get it. I know plenty of Palestinians who want to build positive things and are very peaceful. Absolutely. But we're talking about the vast, overwhelming majority. Yeah? More than the normal standard deviation. More than 68.3%. 68.7%, whatever the number is, right? They do not seek to build something great and grand. They want to destroy. That is how they've been brainwashed. That is how they've been miseducated. That's how their thinking has been poisoned. They are taught to hate and they're taught to seek destruction, even if that includes self destruction. Now, you can say, well, that's really bigoted of you. How can you say that? You're just saying all the Arabs are bad. No, I'm not saying all the Arabs are bad. If you're listening to what I'm actually saying, you would know what I'm saying. And if you listen to what I'm saying, you'd realize even the Arab nations outside of Israel, like Saudi Arabia itself, even Egypt, they don't have time for these people, right? Why is it you think that Egypt does not open their border? It's because they don't want Palestinians in their country. Why is it that you think the Saudis want to make peace with Israel and they keep saying, we want nothing to do with the Palestinians. We're not interested in their stupid fight anymore? Why do you think that the Prince of Saudi Arabia says that? Because he's sick and tired of having to be dragged into this stupid conflict that he wants no part of and that he doesn't agree or support with the Palestinian struggle. Right? He wants it to be over and done with. He wants to sign a peace treaty with Israel, but he can't because of political reasons back in his country. But he would love very much to see this conflict end so that he could sign a peace treaty with Israel. It's very well known. This isn't a secret. I'm not revealing anything that you probably didn't know if you know anything about this topic. Anyway, so yes, the DOP is still alive because there's still areas A, B, and C and the area around Hebron and all this other stuff that the DOP put in place. But overall, Israel has every legal right. And we'll see what time will do. Maybe Israel will let it continue. Maybe they'll say, that's it, enough is enough, and declare it to be dead and remove the PA from existence and make a new way forward. Whatever will happen, time will tell. I wish you all peace. And I mean that, no matter who you are, even if you're Palestinian, I wish you peace too. I wish we could live in peace side by side and peace and prosperity. Anyway, guys, till the next time, like and follow and subscribe and share this video if you would. It'd be nice to reach more people. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.